In a previous video, I explored what the potential impacts of either a long-form or single-year IRA conversion might look like. If you missed those videos, you can check them out after this one. I'll put links in the description, but I kept seeing the same interesting comments. What would this look like if you were 65 and had both Social Security and a pension already going? Well, it's a great question, and I'm really intrigued by what that might show us. So in this video, that's exactly what we're going to look at. We'll explore the conversion potential, impacts, and pitfalls for a married couple age 65 that has both a pension and Social Security already going. But first, I'm Curtis Crossland of Suttle, Crossland Wealth Advisors, and the purpose of this channel is to discuss financial topics and ultimately help people build more tax-efficient retirements. So let's get into it. First thing we'll do is we'll set the stage so we can get into this review. Here we're going to meet once again my favorite test guinea pigs, Joe and Jane. This time, they're both 65 years old. They both retired at 62, which is also the age that they both started taking their Social Security. And now that they're 65, they're both going to start collecting a pension as well. In looking at their plan, their concerns have shifted more from being able to retire to seeing if they can mitigate any of the tax bomb that's going to be coming their way. And another big concern for them is going to be what happens to their money when they die. And I do want to make a point here that I do think that this concern is often overlooked, but this has a real impact on the after-tax value of your life's work. You might also notice that, at least in this example, we've included Joe Jr. So Joe and Jane understand that most beneficiaries will have only 10 years to distribute retirement assets once they're gone. And since they have one child, in this case, Joe Jr., who is in his late 30s and is doing pretty well for himself financially, they worry that the 10 years of the inherited IRA distributions are going to come with a huge tax cost. And this is especially if the money continues to grow. And this can also be if Joe Jr. happens to live maybe in a state that also has pretty high income tax rates. But more on that to come. And now we'll take a look at what they are working with in terms of their assets and net worth. So in this breakdown, Joe and Jane, they both have a $500,000 401k each. That adds up to $2 million between the two of them. They also have $150,000 just in their joint banking. And we're going to say their house is worth $420,000. And we'll also make a point that they are debt free. They don't have anything that they owe on the home or any other debts at all. So net worth for them, right at that 1.57 million number, with essentially 1.15 of that made up of cash and then investments. Next, we're going to take a look at their goals. And here we can see that they want to spend $7,200 per month in retirement. We've included some additional retirement health care cost. We've also included $25,000 that we're going to call go-go years spending, and this is going to be for a 10-year period. And then one other thing that we've decided to add in just for fun, because I know some people have asked the question, is something for a charitable gift. And the idea here is that they're going to give $10,000 to charity. This is going to be every year until they both pass away. And this is also a good time to state that the life expectancy that we're going to be looking at for them is going to be age 90. So now let's take a look at their income, because in this specific example, whereas in previous examples, I've looked at somebody that is basically trying to pay for retirement with a combination of their investments plus Social Security. Well, now we're looking at somebody that has pensions. You know, what happens if you have additional sources of income? So pensions are specifically what I'm including here, but in some sense, this example can speak to situations where you maybe have income from other sources. Maybe there's rents or royalties. Maybe there is additional income from, some ownership that you had in a business that you haven't yet sold. There can be several different places that you might get income from, maybe a part-time job, but the idea is that what I wanted to show in this is specifically pension income included with Social Security, and the amount that they're receiving per year is roughly $100,000 from these sources. Now, to break it down a little bit, because Joe took his Social Security at age 62, he's going to have a reduced amount. So his benefit amount is $1,960 per month. Had he decided to wait until a later age, that number would have been bigger. And when anyone takes Social Security is going to be made up of a combination of personal factors, but at least in their situation, we're saying age 62 for both. So they went with the initial amount that they could get, $1,960 for Joe. And then for Jane, she's got $1,330 per month. So again, when you add up the Social Security sources plus the pension incomes, approximately $100,000 of regular stable income is what they're going to have. And so just to recap our assumptions, again, both are retired. They retired at 62. They're both age 65 right now. They both started Social Security at 62. Now at 65, they're going to each be receiving their pensions. They have $1 million in pre-tax account balances combined between their 401k accounts. They do have some emergency funds in cash. We're using life expectancy age 90, and they're going to be affording retirement through a combination of their regular income sources, including the pensions, and what they're going to get out of Social Security, plus the investment portfolios. So what is their Monte Carlo telling us, at least off the bat? Well, initially, things look pretty good. They have a greater than 99% likelihood of success. We are seeing that they have a median terminal balance on their Monte Carlo of just over 2.1 million, which is more than what they have currently. If we come over here and take a look at their confidence and dispersion, we see that it's pretty ideal. Again, median line seems to grow over the years, ending at roughly 2.1 million by age 90. Between that 5 and 95% confidence level, we're seeing positive results, and we really don't see anything crash down before age 90 at or below that 5% confidence interval. And just to get an idea of what their withdrawal rate looks like, it does start out pretty low, does have a little bit of an uptick, falls off again around age 75, and then it does start to escalate as we get further out into age. But you'll notice there is no projection of an income shortage. So here we can see that they have less of a concern of having a successful retirement. And this is where they're going to shift gears and start to look at, okay, now we're in retirement. Are there opportunities? Are there things that we could be looking at that may have a material effect on us for the rest of our lives and for this financial life that we've essentially built, saving this money during our careers? So now we're going to take a look and see what they might be able to do in regards to a tax strategy. Now, at least in this example, because of their income sources, they don't have a need to pull from IRA accounts to specifically help support their ongoing expense needs. So what we're basically looking at in terms of any type of a tax strategy would in effect be conversion. So what would happen if they were to look at various conversion levels? Would that have an effect on the projection of their ending balances, specifically tax adjusted ending balances? And then would it have any effect on the amount of taxes that they'll pay in their lifetime? Well, here we can see that doing a conversion up to that 12 or 15% bracket does show a little bit more in terms of tax adjusted ending assets. It does show less in total taxes paid. And I don't know how much this will necessarily matter to anybody, but it does also show that there's a little bit less that they would be required to take on account of required minimum distributions later. But they're in effect taking that money and doing a conversion with it early. So what are some of the other things that can affect? Well, let's look at some comparison here. If we look at federal taxes paid, again, what the green shows us is proposed strategy. So they would pay a little bit more in tax up front, converting at that 12 to 15% level. And just a quick note, the 12 or 15% just references if TCJA sunsets or the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act sunsets, if I haven't mentioned that yet. But if they pay a little bit more tax up front to do the conversion before they may have to start taking out money to live on, or before they may have to start taking out money to pay for required minimum distributions, because there's still going to be things like inflation, we do see that if, and this is a big if, they both live to be 90, there could be the potential for a lower federal tax paid by doing some conversion over these next few years. Now, another big consideration that I don't know if I discuss often enough is, where do you live? What state? Do you have a high income tax state? Do you have a zero income tax state? All this is looking at is the federal tax paid. Now, we can come over here and we can take a look at some of the tax implications over here in the cash flows on what the tax payment might look like at the state level. But this is something that you are going to have to try to understand on your own as well. Do you plan to stay in the state that you're in? Do you plan to move? How is the state going to affect? This should be weighed as well, because this can be a cost. And as I've mentioned in almost every other video I've done on this topic, if there are additional costs, taxes, those can act as a drag on your portfolio, and those also have compounding effects. So if we hop back over here, we can also take a look at the makeup of the accounts that they have later on as well. So if they do conversion at the 12 to 15% level, they can change the shape of some of their account balance to push it more towards that Roth IRA or more towards the tax-frees we're seeing here. And it does project to have a little bit more in that ending portfolio value, especially on a tax-adjusted basis. But something else to highlight with this is also, what is the terminal tax rate? Is your son or daughter, if you leave money to them, are they in an expensive state? Did they have, a multiple six-figure job where money coming to them out of an IRA account for a period of 10 years or some makeup within those 10 years, is that going to be taxed, at 32% plus rates? And then what happens at the state level? All of this has to be factored in when you're deciding on if there is any merit to this. Is there any potential? And then we'll also take a look at the withdrawal and how complicated that might be. These look pretty similar. So why might they consider doing this? Well, if they like the idea that they project to have a little bit more in that tax-adjusted ending portfolio balance number, if they like the idea of being able to provide something to their son that would be on an after-tax basis, they may be more willing to take on that tax themselves now and then get those dollars into a Roth IRA to provide for their family, in this case, their son, on an after-tax basis. Because remember, if there is a 10-year window for those inherited IRAs, somebody that inherits a Roth IRA, they would have 10 years before they would have to distribute any of it. And what's so impactful about that is they could simply let the account continue to work, continue to grow if it's going to grow, and then any additional earnings they would get in that 10-year window could then be tax-free to them as well if they delay until the very end of that 10-year period to distribute. So if you're trying to optimize, this can have an effect on your decision making. And in the case for Joe and Jane, this is something that they desire. As long as it makes sense for them, they want to be able to leave something tax-free in the Roth to their son. So if 12 and 15% gets us a little ways there, what does it look like if we do different amounts? So let's take a look. So instead of that 12 or 15%, let's bump it up and say, all right, let's stay within that 22 and 25%. What happens? Well, now all of a sudden we have a larger projection on the tax-adjusted ending asset. We have a larger number in terms of total federal taxes paid less. I think it's safe to assume that the state would be less as well. We'd likely see that in the cash flows. And then again, if it matters, we'd see less that would have to be withdrawn from those tax deferred accounts, during those required minimum years, often at the twilight years of their lives. So somebody might look at this and say, well, wow, I'd love to have a bigger number when it comes to, tax adjusted ending assets. I'd love to have less taxes paid. But what is the catch? What are the implications? Well, you got to understand, like I said before, there are things that can act as drags, costs being one of them, tax being one of them. You don't necessarily get to convert up to that 22 or 25% level without the potential for additional concerns. So some of the additional concerns that you start to flirt with or deal with are going to be things like increases in Medicare's premium, Medicare's IRMA. You also have to be concerned about things like net investment income tax. And these costs may not seem very big, but again, they have to act as a drag. But I do want to make a point that the softwares are attempting to account for that. They are trying to take into account some of these extra tax costs and still try to give us a net effect. Now, this is not a crystal ball, so this is always my disclaimer. Take everything you see with a grain of salt. This is just an educational video to get you thinking. But softwares are attempting to do that. So when you look at something like this, the Medicare premium tax bracket breakdown, we can see that if they were to convert in their situation, Joe and Jane's here, up to that 22 or 25%, they would be tipping themselves into IRMA. They would be paying an additional premium. So people are going to balk at that. They might say, well, under no circumstances do I want to have that just on principle or as a matter of doctrine. Okay. But in looking at the projections, because I do get this question a lot, which is, well, should you convert if it's going to push you into some of these zones? You need to do the analysis. You need to try to understand it for yourself. And even after doing all this, you might get favorable numbers and still not have the conviction. But how do you know what you can choose to do until you've done the analysis? So in the case here, if they push to that 22 or 25% level, they would have to face at the very least some years with an increase in Medicare's IRMA. But keep in mind, Medicare's IRMA looks back 2 years. The increase in premium is only for that year, and they will do another means test the following year, and then each subsequent year. Now, looking again at some of these comparisons, I guess we'll just start with the withdrawal. Now you see the shape of their asset base fundamentally alters to the point where they end up with no pre-tax balance, no 401k balance because of those conversions. And so any money that they would be taking out at this point would just be on necessity. Oh, we need to pay for our life, or we need to pay for this or that. Over here, if they're required to do those minimum distributions, we see an escalation in those later years. We see an ever increasing amount that they may have to take from those pre-tax accounts. And the idea is that the tax is going to escalate with that. And so we'll take a look over here at the federal taxes paid. And, the question for them is, are they willing to make this larger upfront payments of tax? With the idea that if they live that long life, they'll end up saving on the federal tax in the long run. Some of the pitfalls that you may see with this, well, what if they die when they're 80? That is something that has to be considered. Do you have longevity in your family? Do you have any health issues or concerns that might, prevent you from getting to age 90? Not all of us are going to make it there. I get that. But from a planning perspective, you have to look at a healthy enough runway in retirement unless there are known factors that would require you to look shorter. But if that's the case, if let's say you have health concerns, all the more reason that if you are trying to understand this for yourself, you need to do a proper analysis with a professional. Those type of details can also be factored into something like this. But at least in Joe and Jane's situation, so far, looking at that 22 or 25% level does show them with lower projected federal taxes paid during their lifetime. But the other thing that we will look at that was a big concern is this, that tax-adjusted ending wealth. We do have that bigger tax-adjusted ending portfolio value, but now look at this. If they're willing to be more aggressive, willing to do more of that conversion into the higher bracket, they could, at least in this example here, change the shape of their investments more towards the Roth. So to the people that ask that question, well, hey, I've got these income sources. Maybe I have a pension. How realistic is it for me to consider anything like this? You should always be considering your tax strategy. It needs to be on the basis of your personal details, and you need to do your own analysis or work with a professional. But regardless of what your circumstances are, you should be looking to see, are there things that you could be doing to optimize? And then this one, just because we can, we'll look at the required minimum distributions. You'll notice that little tiny sliver down here. The proposed strategy or the conversion, all that money's out of there. All that money gets out of there. If they decide not to do any conversion, they're basically on a pathway to have to do all these. Now, if you die and you leave a big pre-tax balance like old 401k accounts or IRA accounts, that's when that will go to your kids or beneficiaries. If they are subject to the 10-year rule, then this will be their situation. This is something that they will have to take on. So you have to determine how convicted you are to some of these objectives. But in this example, even though they have pensions, we are seeing that there is a potential in the projections to show them something favorable if they consider conversions as a part of their tax strategy. Now, another neat feature that Right Capital has added is this ability to try to run almost like a solver. So this is not going to answer specifically some of the questions that I will get in regards to, well, what if they converted up to 21%? Or what if they targeted, an effective rate of 17%? It's not going to do that. But what this tries to do is it tries to find that sort of, efficient frontier, that min-max, if you will, of, tax-adjusted ending balance, and then what the conversion may or may not look like when it comes to every situation. So at least for this particular tool in Joe and Jane's situation, it's saying that if they converted that 24 or 28, that within the scope of these projections, that would provide right here the biggest tax adjusted ending asset balance. If we actually come back and look at that then, so if we come back over here and say, all right, well, let's just go up to that 24 and 28. Well, what do we see? Okay, we do see a little bit of a bigger tax adjusted ending balance compared to doing nothing. We do see a bigger number for the taxes, for less taxes paid federally. We do see less having to be withdrawn from taxable accounts. And so this begs the question, all right, well, what happens if we just push it even more? Let's go up to that 32, 33. Well, look at that. Now we start to see a little bit of a retreat. Now it's the idea that some of these drags are starting to weigh too heavily on what the projections are showing us. So is there another number that's less than 32? Maybe it's more than the 24 or 28, or maybe it's somewhere between, the 22 and the 32. Is there another number? Maybe. That is something that you can work to assess. But I think in general, what we are seeing is even though they have a pension, even though they already started Social Security at 62, there are compelling reasons for them to think about whether or not the objectives of these projected lower taxes, or again, leaving more of these ending account balance numbers, leaving more of this to their son tax-free, matters to them and matters to that 10-year window. So just to try to recap the trade-offs, a lot of things has to go absolutely correct for this sort of projected idealized thing to go right for Joe and Jane. Number one, they both have to live till 90. They both have to hope there's no major legislative changes that create a ton of interruption. They both have to hope that there's no life events that would require them to necessarily have to access or do something ahead of time with their assets. There's a lot that can go wrong. 25 years is a long time to have to worry. And the other thing that I'll probably take a look at some point is what happens to, let's say, a married couple who might have a situation where they're looking at their tax strategy, looking at conversions. What if one of them dies when they're 80 and the other lives to be 100, or dies when they're 70 and the other lives to be 90? Is there viability in a strategy once those tax brackets are reduced, once you're more subject to things like the widow's tax trap? So I'll put a video out at some point that will take a look at that example, but there's a lot that has to go right. What if Joe Jr. ends up in a situation where he has, let's say, no job, no income? What if he could have distributed, a pre-tax IRA account at, minuscule tax rates? We don't know the future. So there are a lot of things that could derail a strategy like this. So when somebody sits down and when they take a look at their tax strategy, and if they see things like this, a big thing that they have to consider, and I'll overuse this word, but it is conviction. Are you willing to prepay the tax up front for the attempt to try to get a better situation down the line? Now, on the flip side of that, some people will say, well, I don't see how tax rates can do anything but go up. But again, it highlights that none of us know the future. And this does create, in my mind, an importance for folks to understand their situation, look at what I would call this strategic 30,000-foot view of everything, but then every single year, it's like you're coming back and you're looking a lot more tactically. You got your macro that you can see in something like this, but then every year you're going back to that micro. What am I doing now? Am I convicted to do it? Can I facilitate it? So what do you think of these projections? Does this example surprise you at all? Or how does this relate to what you're dealing with or what you plan to do? Did I miss something you wish I would have shown or discussed? Well, let me know down in the comments. And also let me know what you plan to do or what topics are of interest as it relates to tax planning. Who knows, maybe I'll make a video of your concerns next. Once more, I'm Curtis Crossland, and if you want to see how we help folks build a more tax-focused and efficient retirement, be sure to check us out at SuttleCrossland.com and subscribe for future videos.